Looking back on the week that was and forward to the week ahead, it's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Waiver wire, trades, roster management. To win in fantasy football, you must remember one simple rule. Never get out-hustled. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwain McFarland.
Dwayne's got a cowboy shirt on. I'm still dressed for work. It's 8 o'clock on the East Coast, so that means it must be a special edition of the Prime Time Hustle. What's going on out there, everybody? Welcome in. Thanks for joining us. It's Brian Drake and Dwain McFarland. We are the Fantasy Football Hustle. We're members of the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast Network. And it's a big night in the NFL. There's a lot of stuff going on. We've got trades. We've got major injuries. The waiver wire is about to hit. And we want all you folks to settle in for the next hour, talk to Dwain and I. We've got our YouTube feed going. We've got it going on Periscope. If I'll tweet it out, and then Dwain can retweet it so actually people will see it. And we're going to have some fun tonight. So welcome in, folks, to the Fantasy Football Hustle. Brian Drake, Dwain McFarland, as I said. Dwain, how are you? What's new, my friend? And welcome to Week 8.
Man, I am doing good. What's new? It seems like there's a ton new, like just news all breaking in the last, several hours, Drake. So ready to jump into it. But, I just, one more time, cowboy shirt.
Oh, enough.
Do you have anything else to say? Where's your Eagle shirt?
Let's see. I left it with our corners. It's 20 feet behind everyone else.
It's too soon. I should have wore the hustle shirt instead of the. Sorry, I had to get that in.
Eagles are terrible. They should be a team active at the trade deadline. Possibly, they need a corner. Maybe Chris Harris. They need a defensive tackle. We'll see if they do something there. Maybe they need a wide receiver, but one guy they won't be getting, Dwain, is Emmanuel Sanders, because he was dealt today from the Denver Broncos to the San Francisco 49ers. So it was Sanders and a fifth-round pick for a 2023 and 4 from San Francisco. Let's dive right in. What is the impact on the 49ers now getting Emmanuel Sanders? What does this do to Dante Pettis, to Kittle, to Deebo Samuels, and this whole passing tree?
Well, not too long ago, in the not so distant past, we saw that receivers would struggle, right? Moving around, changing teams. But then we saw Amari Cooper come over to the Dallas Cowboys and just, completely, destroy everyone, on the weeks where they actually got the ball to him. So I think with Sanders, the good news is, he's going from one scheme to a scheme that's very similar, because Scangarello's scheme is actually an offshoot of Kyle Shanahan's scheme. So I think from a standpoint of Emmanuel Sanders, making a transition to his team, I think it'll be a lot quicker than normal. Plus, just the history we've started to see with players being able to, get more involved sooner after trades. I think from that perspective, it's going to be fine. It kind of stinks, for Dante Pettis. Now, some of this could be due to, Marquise Goodwin had a head injury early in this game. They said he could have came back, but he didn't. But, Pettis had a really good trend going of, his snaps had gone from 63 to 71 to 92%. His routes ran per dropback had gone from 68 to 74 to 96. So he was a guy that, this morning when I first woke up, was doing a lot of my research, Pettis was one of the guys that I had highlighted that we needed to talk about tonight. And he still may be a guy that we need to talk about because, Kendrick Bourne actually stepped in and saw a big jump. He saw the biggest jump in snaps last week with Goodwin not playing. And then we saw Deebo Samuel also out last week. So I don't know how much of it's Pettis versus, the other guys being out. But as far as, Emmanuel Sanders goes, I just don't see a way where he doesn't come over and probably end up as the number 2 target on the team just because of the inconsistencies that they've had. You know what I mean? It's not like Pettis has ran away with the job. It's not like Marquise Goodwin has, really done a lot. Now, in a lot of these game strips, they haven't had to. Really, the only guy that's done a lot has been George Kittle. So I would expect, from a standpoint of the pecking order to go, I think Emmanuel Sanders is now going to be the number 2. It might take a week or two to get going, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's sooner than that.
I really kind of like what this does for Deshaun Hamilton in Denver, looking at that side of the trade now. In the final 4 games last year, Manny Sanders, he was hurt, obviously. The guy averaged over 6 catches and 45 yards a game, and he was getting almost 10 targets. So that's really good look for a guy I guarantee people in your waiver wire are not going to be talking about tomorrow because they're going to be looking at everything else going on. Deshaun Hamilton, sneaky play as maybe a wide receiver 3 flex going forward.
Yeah, he could be. So if you look at just the trend that he had already had, coming into the week, they had slowly been getting him a little bit more and more involved. So he had gone from 52% to 65 to 66% of the snaps. His routes per dropback had gone from 52 to 70 and then 70 again. Now, most of that, like in this last game, they were trailing so much they had to run a lot of 11 personnel instead of 12 or 22, which got Hamilton on the field, in the slot. But yeah, I fully expect him to be the guy that takes Emmanuel Sanders' role. I mean, we'll have to keep an eye on like Juwan Winfrey and, some of these other guys. But as of right now, yeah, I think Hamilton is the guy. Now, with Joe Flacco at quarterback and with this offense struggling, it's like you said, this is a guy that he's somebody that you would want to own in a deeper league. I think the other thing that could happen here, Drake, is we could see, more balls go to Noah Fant. Mm-hmm. Fant has been hanging right around.
If you could catch one of them.
Yeah, I know he struggled a little bit. Kind of reminds me of Eric Ebron early in his career with some of the drops and the issues that, Ebron had. But, he's hovering right around that 70% routes per dropback, which isn't great, but it's not terrible either. But you've seen they haven't been using as much of Hireman lately. A lot of that, again, is game script. But I think Fant could be the other guy. So those two guys should both get a slight bump. And then Cortland Sutton, he's it. He's the clear number one. He's had 30%, 25%, and 21% of the target share over the last 3 weeks. He's on the field all the time as far as routes per dropback go. He's on the field all the time as far as snaps go. He's getting, good average depth of target. He's leading the team in air yards. So I expect all those things to continue, and Sutton could get even a slight little bump. It'd be nice if we could just get a little bit better quarterback play out of Mr. Joe Flacco.
Another trade went down in the NFL. This one right around when you're eating breakfast. Mohamed Sanu wakes up on a 1-7 at this point, the Atlanta Falcons. All of a sudden you're on the undefeated Super Bowl champion Patriots. So quite a day for Mohamed Sanu. Patriots gave up a second-round pick for him. I think that's a little steep, but hey, to each their own. They wanted their guy, and they went out and got him. So let's say, how does he fit in New England? To me, this is a really, really crowded receiver room now. You've got Josh Gordon. We'll see what his health is like. You've got N'Keal Harry coming back, their first-round pick. Throw in Jacoby Myers, Dorsett, excuse me. Don't forget about Super Bowl MVP Julian Edelman. Now we've got Manny Sanders and Ben Watson's in there at tight end. You can't be comfortable with any of these guys in your lineup now.
Yeah, and Sanu's not a guy that I'm super excited about. I think, it's one of those moves, Drake, where it's good for football. It's good for what the Patriots want to do, because Absolutely. The thing with Sanu, and the reason Atlanta likes having Sanu on the field, so much, is he's a really good blocker too. So he's a good slot or Z receiver. He's a good possession guy. He occasionally will make some nice run after the catch, plays. He's a strong guy, but he's really good, at blocking. So he's just a versatile player. He's one of those guys that the Patriots like. They can move him all over. They can line him up in the slot. They can line him up outside. I don't know how much you watched that game last night, Drake. I had to turn it off at halftime, and I watch a lot of football, but I couldn't take it anymore. But in the first half, I was just noticing, with all the injuries the Patriots have to tight ends and everything else, I mean, Brandon Bolden was like lining up on the field out wide when there were other
back shoulder fades.
I know, when there's other running backs, on the field. It's not like it was just something where, let's get Brandon Bolden out there and then let's, like the Patriots do very often, right? They motion their guy out just to see if it's man or zone coverage, and then they'll throw to that back. Unless his name's Sony Michel, because goodness gracious, Sony Michel, that middle screen that he dropped, that was a touchdown. Should have been a touchdown, Sony. And you saw Brady and you saw Josh McDaniel both like, oh my God, are you kidding me, Sony? But anyway, I'm with you on this one. I think honestly, Sanu could see, a slight drop off, but you got to give him a little bit of an edge here just because he will be with Brady. It's not like Jacoby Myers, and we like Myers, he's done well. But it's not like Jacoby Myers and Philip Dorsett and a lot of these other guys have just secured some really big role. Really, the only guy right now, the only two guys in the offense right now that are seeing really consistent work in the passing game are James White and Rex Burkhead. The other guys are kind of up and down. So I would, I want to temper a little bit just saying that there's no room for Sanu, but I definitely wouldn't spend a ton of money on him on the waiver wire just based on him, going to the Pats.
Let's again spin this to the other team now. Obviously, Matt Ryan's got an ankle issue. Maybe he sits this week. Doesn't seem to be too serious. We'll find out more as the week goes on. Does this really help a guy like Calvin Ridley or Justin Hardy, maybe now, who can take over that slot role? Austin Hooper, maybe even a bigger bump for him in the middle of the field. We'll see what happens with Matt Ryan, but there's targets to go around now. Sanu is definitely getting the ball thrown his way on a team that can't run and is always behind.
Yeah, Sanu was seeing 14% of the targets, which was, it was fourth on the team. You've got Julio now at 21% after back-to-back 25+% weeks in target share. You've got second on the team is Austin Hooper at 18%, and then you've got Calvin Ridley at 15%, and then you had Mohamed Sanu at 14%. So, we've talked, it's funny, I think we just talked about this last week, saying, can this offense just stop trying to spread it around so much and just try to manufacture plays to these guys? So I think there's a chance for that to happen now. Will it happen? I don't know. In my mind right now, I do believe this has to be a slight bump for Calvin Ridley. Austin Hooper, I mean, goodness, how much of a bump does the guy need? I don't know, but it does seem like, there could be more to go around between the three instead of the four. If somebody's in a really deep league, Drake, it's Justin Hardy is the guy that's been backing up, Sanu. Russell Gage is the guy that comes in when Julio Jones rotates off. So if you're in a super, you're like in a 16-man leaguer type thing, Hardy could slip right into a Mohamed Sanu type role. If you were in a league where Mohamed Sanu was a viable starter before, on certain weeks, Justin Hardy could turn into that. What I do hope, though, is that it's more about just, distributing this ball more evenly across Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, and Austin Hooper.
That's a deep skank right there if you're in a league with those guys. Holy smokes.
That is. That's why I even threw out the 16-teamer.
Yikes. All right, everybody wants to talk about the Detroit backfield. That's where all the fab money's going this week. Kerryon Johnson sent to IR. If he even returns, I think I read it's going to be week 16 anyways. So count him out. He's done for fantasy. Ty Johnson, who was in on 65% of the snaps this past weekend, ended the game. He rushed 10 times, had 4 targets. Everyone's going to be blowing their load on him. Don't forget about J.D. McKissick. He came over with Bevel, right, from Seattle. He liked him there. He played 24% of the snaps, ran the ball 5 times, took 3 targets. So what's your breakdown on this backfield? I think people are going to spend a bunch of money tonight and then be pissed when they go and sign like C.J. Anderson or something tomorrow.
Well, they signed Alfred Morris today.
Oh, Christ, forget it.
Yeah.
Save your money, folks.
Yeah, it's a tough one, Drake, because, here we are, we're heading into week 8. You've got a young, potentially talented player. Ty Johnson is a really, he can be electric. And I mean, from what we saw last week, he's basically stepping into Kerryon's role. So if you looked at the week before, snaps, Kerryon 71%. Last week, Kerryon played 15, and then it was Ty Johnson for 65%. You had Kerryon at 65% of the rushing attempts. He was down to 25% this last week. Ty Johnson saw 50%. J.D. McKissick saw 25%. So my hunch is that they're gonna give Ty Johnson the first chance to do this. And I think they've brought in Alfred Morris. Here's the thing that scares us is how many running backs have we talked about on Detroit, over the past 2 years with Matt Patricia, and, guys we thought wouldn't be getting on the field, but they still continue to, like LeGarrette Blount last year, or even C.J. Anderson early this year. And then they finally made this move to seemingly to let Kerryon Johnson do his thing. So I don't know that they feel the same about Ty Johnson, but I do think that Ty Johnson becomes the lead guy, Drake. So I'm anticipating that he'll get 40 to 50% of the rushing attempts each week. What I like about him is he's a really good receiver out of the backfield as well. So he ran a route on 60% of the dropbacks this past week, and that's despite J.D. McKissick being really good at that as well. He ran a route on 19% of the team dropbacks, and Ty Johnson saw 9%. So this could be something. So if you think about the Patriots, right, which is, where Patricia comes from, now Bevel has got his roots, you already mentioned it, with Seattle, and that's where McKissick is from. But if they want to make this more of a, we want to use passing type backs, and then we might use somebody like an Alfred Morris down around, the goal line. That's something you could see.
Cardinals signed Alfred Morris. So
is it Cardinals? Oh, my bad. Why was I saying? Okay, my bad. Sorry. Oh, they signed Paul Perkins before, who hasn't seen the field, hardly at all. Yeah. Oh, my bad. Thanks, man.
How much money would you lay out on a Ty Johnson tonight if you're in the league and, everybody needs running backs, let's be honest.
Man, it really depends on your roster construction. But I think at this point in the season, if you've been waiting and you've been hurting, I don't see how you don't drop, 30, 50%, because you have to take a swing somewhere, and we just haven't had many to take this year, Drake. Normally, there's other situations that play out, but let's think about this for a second. So what would be the other situations we would be waiting on? We'd be waiting on Kansas City, right? And trying to see if that could dwindle down to one. Well, most of those guys are rostered, and there's 4 guys there. So there's 3 guys in the way of Darwin Thompson. Darrell Henderson's probably rostered in most spots now after last week. Malcolm Brown getting scratched, before the game. That sent a lot of people out to the waiver wire to grab Darrell Henderson if he was available. He would be a guy that I would say I would rather probably still hold, at this point. But and so we could be waiting on something big to happen there with Gurley going down, but he's probably owned in most places. So I'm sitting here trying to think of a backfield where we're just sitting here, like last year, a lot of people dropped Nick Chubb, and then the Nick Chubb thing blew up, and that all worked out, right? A year before that, people drafted Alvin Kamara in the 10th, 11th, and 12th round, and they finally got rid of Adrian Peterson, like after week 4, and then Kamara was off to the races after that. You tell me, Drake, who am I missing? I'm not thinking of a great young runner that we're just sitting on a bench somewhere that's probably free in a fantasy league where we're sitting there waiting, going, man, that's the guy. If his starter goes down, he's the dude.
I think what we're looking for is, and if they're not already owned, it's Alexander Madison. If Cook went down, you'd break the bank on him.
But he's owned. I mean, he's owned.
I'm just saying if he's not. Let's say he's not. And then Raquel Armstead, I think, in Jacksonville, if Fournette went down because his workload is so massive and they really don't have anybody else besides him. And we saw it with Gallman. Sometimes people don't have the backups. So you just you look at every league is specific. You got to look at your wire and say who's out there, who's going to help my team, and go for it.
Armstead's a good one. He might be available, but I mean, I guess what I'm saying here is you're still sitting here hoping that Fournette, gets hurt. I mean, there's a few guys we just named, and there's a good chance that there's the starters in front of them never get hurt. Yeah. So I think if you've been hurting at running back all this time, I think Ty Johnson's worth taking, a chance on. I will definitely be putting some bids on him because he is. I did go check some of my high stake leagues, and he is available. I think the low end for him, Drake, is probably, if you're just you don't even need him, but you're just trying to see if you can land him, you might throw out 10 to 15%, of your fab. But if it's somebody that you really want to land, I think you're going to have to go up in the 40 to 50% range, to own Ty Johnson.
Yeah, we got a guy in the league I'm in today. He actually made a trade to move up, and he traded for the waiver claim. So I like leagues like that where you can go out and do all those fun things.
Right.
That's really cool. One last news item here before we get into it with quarterbacks and go through the positions here. I wanted to get your read because it has to do with the waiver wire. Will Fuller injured his hamstring. So Kenny Stills, who played 59, I believe he played 59 or 63 snaps, something like that. Kuti only ran 44 snaps. Kenny Stills is a really intriguing player in this offense now if he is the number 2 option. And I just want to make sure our listeners out there are not looking over Stills. And I mean, this guy is a difference maker for the next month if Will Fuller's out. I want to get your thoughts on him.
No, I think you're absolutely right. He was a guy I was hoping that you would hit early, and you did. He jumped out there for 94% of the snaps with Fuller only playing 5%, ran a route on 95% of the dropbacks. So, I mean, he just stepped right into Will Fuller's role. He saw 15% of the targets, which is a little less than what Fuller's been seeing. Fuller's been locking down, 20% plus each week. But Stills is also still just coming back, from being injured. Kuti did see the field a bit more as well, but that was more to do with the fact that the Texans, were in a negative game script. They lost this game by 7 points. They passed the ball on 60. They dropped back to pass 67% of the time. So they ran a lot more 11 personnel this past week. So that also got Kuti on the field, because that had been he and Stills splitting that. So if the Texans are in a shootout in deeper leagues, Kuti could still be a name, to be keeping in mind as well. You just have to know that whenever they're playing from ahead, they've shown us that they're very willing to run this 12 personnel. They're fine, running Darren Fells and Jordan Akins out there plenty. And in those games, Kuti just won't see the field as much. But Kenny Stills, absolutely. If you're staring down wide receiver bye weeks over the next 2 to 4 weeks, absolutely. This is a guy that could step right into your wide receiver 3 role, and he has some wide receiver 2 upside each week.
Yeah, let's talk about those bye weeks here, because it's going to start getting real hairy. This week you only have the Ravens and the Cowboys off. So Hollywood Brown, he's not playing anyways the past few weeks. So you're missing Amari Cooper and Gallup this week. Next week we've got 4 teams off. You're going to be out of Julio and Ridley. You're going to be missing Boyd, all the Rams guys, Michael Thomas and the Saints. So that's a big wide receiver week in week 9. So maybe you want to look ahead on the waiver wire. Just secure those guys right now. If you need a quarterback, because I can't believe we did 25 minutes of a show and we haven't talked about Patrick Mahomes getting hurt already. But Mahomes went down on Thursday night. Matt Ryan tweaked an ankle. So some of you out there might be looking for a quarterback this week. We don't know who's available in your leagues, but for the most part, Josh Allen, if he's out there playing the Eagles at home, he's the guy you're going to want to add. Jacoby Brissett, I believe, leads the NFL in touchdown passes. Somehow he's still available in a bunch of leagues, so check him out. A couple guys I really like: Stafford, Cousins, Bridgewater. Just kind of overview of some of these guys, Dwayne. What do you think?
Yeah, I think all of those, guys, are fine. We got to see what's going to happen with Breeze, this week. I know there's a chance that he could play. I haven't read the latest on him today, so if you've seen anything, feel free to jump in.
I wouldn't play him. They got their bye following this game. Just let him sit for 2 weeks.
That's what I would think. I agree. But honestly, like Stafford has played very well. Stafford's a guy that, because so many leagues are so shallow, and how I wait in my high stakes leagues to draft quarterback late. Stafford is a guy that I picked up after week 1. And I've used him quite a bit, he's had one game where, you were just like, that was really gross. But other than that, he's been fine. I mean, he's been good enough to have in your lineup, obviously he's not keeping up with Lamar Jackson and, even Dak Prescott for the most part, and Mahomes when he's healthy. But when you start comparing him to the rest of the quarterbacks that are available, Stafford, I think he's fine. Now, Josh Allen, I like Josh Allen too. My guess is he's gone in most leagues just because he got the Dolphins this last week. So it's kind of like, okay, yeah, you could have had him, but now he was probably rostered, after that.
Quick note on Stafford. Not only is he playing against the 32nd ranked past DVOA defense this week, but he just lost his starting running back. So, let's not assume that Ty Johnson's just going to be pounding the rock here like he's Adrian Peterson from the late 90s or 2000s, whatever. Like, Matthew Stafford's going to throw the rock, folks. This is obvious stuff. So I like Matthew Stafford the most. And if you look at Cousins, he might be without Adam Thielen on Thursday night. So as much as Cousins has been lighting it up these past 3-4 games, and he really has, and he's helping you win games if you've got him in your lineup, I don't like Cousins without Thielen, and it's just Diggs out there. What do you say?
Yeah, I can get behind that. Cousins, he's a guy that we've talked about a lot, and I talked about him also on the RSP Fantasy Film and Data podcast a couple of weeks ago, and it's just something where we talked about a lot of these offenses are still new to these guys. They're trying to get them implemented, and I think Cousins is a great example of someone who's now he's gotten things, he's gotten acclimated, right, to the offense that he's playing in. They're still not throwing as many passes, but they're hitting a lot of big passes. But yeah, I agree with you with having Thielen out. I don't blame anyone that would rather go with some of these other guys, but I'm still not completely afraid, of Cousins, because Dalvin Cook is a really solid receiver out of the backfield. We had a Kyle Rudolph sighting. And that's not a reindeer, Drake. We had a Kyle Rudolph sighting, and I think it's part of that's to do with when you don't have Thielen, right? And so they're trying to find other ways to manufacture. But Kyle Rudolph had 18% of the targets, and Irv Smith Jr. had 18% of the targets this last week. So Irv Smith Jr. saw 35% of his routes from the slot this last week. So he's a guy that's getting a little bit more work with Thielen down. And then if you're in a super deep league, this Olabisi Johnson, he had 21% of the targets.
I had that written down. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, now it was,
dive.
yeah, but I mean, it was a nice bump for Diggs. Diggs is now clearly, the one, but then, I think this makes, Rudolph can be in play if you're really hurting at tight end. He can probably be in play. He can be in play for a week or two. And then this Olabisi Johnson, if you're really hurting at receiver and there's just nothing on your wire, that's encouraging. 21%. Basically what happened is Diggs started playing Thielen's snaps, right, and his routes per drop back. And Olabisi Johnson is playing what Diggs was, which is, right in the 75% range of routes ran per drop back. Remember, we were complaining about that a few weeks back, how, that was sucking for Stephon Diggs. So you got to keep things tempered, with Johnson. I expect Diggs to clearly get a bump here for these next couple of weeks.
All right. And my daughter just wanted to say hi to everybody watching out there on Periscope and our YouTube channel. This is Allison. She's a kindergartner. Say hi, everybody. Hi. All right, Allie's
hey, Allison.
Allie's going to bed. She just had dance class, their big Halloween dance party tonight. So, all right. You ready to go to bed, Al?
Yeah.
All right. I'll see you later, honey. Bye. Oh, she almost took the headphones off. That's what happens when you do a live show, folks.
Somebody's calling CPS, Drake. You threw your kid down.
Hey,
tell you.
If you need the best advice in the business and you can't get in touch with Dwain or I on Twitter, he's at Dwain McFarland, I'm at Drake Fantasy. Why don't you head over to establishtheRun.com, because there you're going to only find, I don't know, maybe somebody like Evan Silva, who's manning the ship over there, and they're just doing kick-ass content. Dwayne's doing his utilization report. That's going to be up tomorrow on the site. We've got a 20% off coupon for you guys, okay? So go to their site, use their promo code HUSTLE20. That's going to get you 20% off either a weekly, monthly, or season-long subscription package. It's the buy low air yards model. It's the weekly podcasts. It's the Sunday morning podcast with Adam Levitan and Evan Silva. I listen to this stuff all the time. I'm not bullshitting you guys. It's like the best in the business.
It's great.
So good. So just a quick shill for those guys. Hustle20 is the podcast coupon code. So use that. Save some cash from your boys, Drake and Dwayne. Let's move on to the running back position now. I mean, what can you say about Chase Edmonds here? Who knew that David Johnson was going to take the day off after only one carry for 2 yards? Oh, here comes Mr. Edmonds, who I started in the Fighting Chance high stakes league, or whatever Steve Rappin calls it. I started him because my team was that shitty. So 126 yards, 3 touchdowns, a pair of catches. Wow. Just the Giants stink,
amazing.
First of all.
They do. But Edmonds looked really good. He has that burst, he's very decisive, he played really, really, really well. So I think what's going to happen here, Drake, David Johnson doesn't sound like he's in danger of missing a ton of time, but you got to consider him doubtful, right? Coming up for this week, they signed Alfred Morris.
They only had 2 backs active for that game.
Yeah. So, and they've been doing that. That's been, actually, I'm looking right now. I don't know that they've had another back active yet. It's just been these 2 all season. I'm looking at my utilization report, and I don't see any others on here. There may have been somebody that took a few snaps on special teams, but yeah, it's just been a 2-man backfield. So this is going to be Chase Edmonds' show for the next, probably couple of weeks. The Cardinals have already had their bye, so my guess would be is that we won't see David Johnson this week, and then there's a chance we don't see him the week after. And if Chase Edmonds keeps playing like this, Drake, I think he's going to split more of a workload share, or maybe we see David Johnson playing more at receiver, playing in the slot. Maybe you find ways to get these 2 guys on the field together. If you get Christian Kirk back healthy, and then you have Larry Fitzgerald, and then you have these 2 guys, maybe that's really your 4 weapons. And because we've seen even with Demir Byrd and Trent Sherfield and those guys all getting their snaps, and even, Keyshawn Johnson, who's actually been trending down. He only ran around on 11% of the dropbacks this last week. Isabella's been getting a little bit more involved, but none of those other guys are really lighting it up, Drake. So if I'm
not throwing the ball at all, guys throwing for like 120 yards.
I know. If I'm Kingsbury, and you see this is working, I'm trying to find ways to get these two guys out there together. Now, we don't know if that'll happen, but if there's somebody that's willing that we could see, try to do something like this, I think it would be Kingsbury. So Edmonds, though, I mean, if you get to start him for the next week or 2 or 3, however long it is, feel great because, you've got an RB2 with RB1 upside each week.
Let's say you're in a shallow league or whatever kind of league. Chase Edmonds is available on the wire tonight. Somebody dropped him. He's not there. You've got him out there. You got Edmonds, or you've got Ty Johnson, excuse me. How are you prioritizing these two? Let's say they're both on the wire.
Yeah, I think it depends on, what you need. If you're just about to be facing some bye week problems, then I'm going to prioritize Chase Edmonds. If it's something where you think you need a back that could potentially, give you points for the rest of the season, then I think you got to think about Ty Johnson. If you take Edmonds there, and I don't blame anyone that still prioritizes Edmonds over Ty Johnson, because there's a chance. We just never know how these things are going to go. What if David Johnson's injury? It's obviously, I haven't heard exactly what it is. I was even trying to look before the show, but he's got something serious to only be able to go out there and take a couple of reps and then basically have to shut down for the whole game. So my thought would be, if something lingers on for 4 or 5 weeks, I mean, goodness, Chase Edmonds could end up, taking you all the way to the playoffs. Now, eventually you're going to have to deal with David Johnson being back. So it depends on the situation I'm in. If it's something where I've got a runner either that's hurt or I'm going to be facing a couple of bye weeks, I might prioritize Chase Edmonds and put more there. If it's something where, my running backs have just not been good all year and I've got one and I just need a second one, then I have to put more on Ty Johnson in my mind. Now, we could be totally wrong, Drake. They could just turn it into a 3-way split that we hate. But for right now, it looks like Ty Johnson is going to get, logic tells us he won't get everything Kerryon did, even though he kind of did that this last week. But he looks like he's going to be in the lead role, right? And he is a player that's flashed. He is a player that, had some hype coming out, of college, had some hype whenever the Lions, got him this offseason. So I would still prioritize him, and he's probably going to cost less. Chase Edmonds, just knowing the way these leagues work, where he's available, he's probably going to cost you at least half your budget, maybe 60%, 70%. Because the David Johnson owner, if he's available, and I own David Johnson several times, the David Johnson owners at least going 50%, at least. Sure. To get this guy. So that's where your bidding is going to have to start. So that's the other reason I kind of lean to Ty Johnson. Because let me ask you this, Drake. In 3 weeks, David Johnson's back. How good do you feel about Chase Edmonds?
Not at all.
Yeah, he might be a flex play, but you're going to want to kind of see, right? We don't know. They could just go straight back to David Johnson. I mean, we're kind of hoping after what we've seen from Edmonds in these last 3 weeks, really, he's played great. He's got 18, 15, and 35 PPR points over weeks 5, 6, and 7. That's awesome. But we would want to see that continue, once David Johnson's back and truly healthy, because really the last couple of weeks, David Johnson's been battling, injuries all through that time.
Another backfield that is kind of jumbled up now because there's a new man in the mix is in Buffalo, and the Bills got back Devin Singletary. Yep. He's a guy people were really hyped to get in their lineups, and old reliable Frankie Gore still outsnapped him 30-21 and outtouched him 12-7. What'd you see from the rookie? And I mean, it doesn't look like they're pulling back from Frank Gore at all. He's going to be involved all the time going forward. This is a split.
Yeah, it is a split with Gore getting the slight edge. The good news is, though, that they deactivated T.J. Yeldon, who had been getting work in the passing game in the previous weeks with Devin Singletary out. And we talked about this. I don't know, Drake. I think it was on like our week 2 show. But kind of the big revelation around Singletary was, oh man, they're not going to use Yeldon. They're going to use Singletary as their passing backs. So he ran a route on 40% of the dropbacks this past week. Now his targets came up empty, at a 0. Frank Gore was out there for 40% as well. But if you look at what TJ Yeldon, had been getting, he had been getting around 50 to 60% of the routes per dropback. And so I expect to see Devin Singletary and some more favorable game scripts. I expect to see his routes per dropback up in the 50 to 60% range. I think you'll continue to see his carries, Drake. He'll probably be around the 30, 35% mark. You'll have Gore at the 50 to 55% mark still, just like you said. He's going to be the lead ball carrier. But I think Singletary will be the change of pace back, and I think he's going to get a lot more as we move forward as a receiver. I wouldn't be surprised to see him get, I don't know, anywhere between 10 and 15% of the targets each week. Now, this isn't an offense that's just, flying up and down the field. They're averaging 2 plays, per minute. They're averaging, right at 64 plays per game, which isn't bad. Those are almost close. Those are right at the league average, but it's not like they're a high tempo team by any means.
It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Thanks for joining us here. I'm Brian Drake from FightingChanceFantasy.com. Follow me at Drake Fantasy. He is Dwain McFarland, the man you know from EstablishTheRun.com, FootballGuys.com, MattWaldmanRSP.com, and that really good podcast he does. If you're a football nerd, you want to be in on it. Jay Moyer, Dwain McFarland, the Film and Data RSP cast. I always butcher the name whenever I try to do it, but
it's all right. It's the RSP Fantasy Film and Data podcast. I mess it up sometimes too.
Well, if you're sick out there like me and you've got the flu and you're on antibiotics, you might need to go see a doctor. So we're going to call up Dr. Dwain right now, and he's going to try to fix some of our fantasy backfields because they're just a mess. And, you're throwing up, your nose is running, it's disgusting, and there's no more disgusting place than Cincinnati right now. Joe Mixon, 10 rushes. He was averaging 0.2 yards a rush. Like, this line sucks. It's not Joe Mixon's fault. I mean, if he catches a ball and falls in the end zone, God bless America. But, Dwayne, this is bad news Brown.
Yeah, it's terrible. I don't know. I honestly don't have anything to try to cheer people up about it. I mean, and here's the problem. The utilization, has backed Mixon, fairly well. But Giovanni Bernard, we've talked about him a few weeks now. He's out there, just enough. And now it's like these snaps have tightened, Drake. Over these last 2 weeks, you've got Joe Mixon at 49%, Bernard at 54%, and then this last week, Mixon at 54% and Bernard at 47%. Now they're clearly giving Mixon the ball more. He's at 50% and 50% of the attempts, whereas Gio is at 29 and 20%. He's still getting most of the looks inside the 5. He's got 6 rushing attempts. He's got 60% of the team attempts from inside the 5. But talk about a team that's not really ever inside the 5.
They're garbage.
Yeah,
you're talking to a Tyler Boyd owner here. The guy freaking, almost leads the NFL in targets. He's top 3, and he can't catch 5 balls. But
yeah, this is just one of those situations where I don't know what you can do about it at this point. You're not going to be able to get a lot for Joe Mixon in a trade. Gio Bernard, is probably a cheap buy if you want, because people don't realize how much playing time he's getting because he hasn't really put up, any big points yet. But, they're both getting, on the season. This is the killer, Drake. On the season, Mixon's at 6% of targets. That's a killer. If you're in a bad offense like this and you're not going to get the touchdown opportunities regularly, and you also know game scripts could really just play you very quickly out of a big workload as far as attempts go, what's the saving grace for backs in those situations? It's the receptions.
Yeah.
And he's not getting them. And despite all the issues they have as far as not having pass catchers, so if you've got Mixon and there's any way he carries name value or he happens to pop for a big week here sometime soon, all I can say is, you just try to move him if you can, because right now he's tough to put in a lineup.
In a half-point PPR, guys who have more points than Joe Mixon, who you took in the second round of your fantasy draft, mind you. That's what's pissing you off, is because you invested a second-round pick. Let's see. Jamal Williams has more points. Miles Sanders, Latavius Murray, Frank Gore, LaShawn McCoy, Royce Freeman, Carlos Hyde, Jordan Howard. I mean, all these guys, Chase Edmonds by a mile. It's crazy. He's got like one more point than, what's his name? Ronald Jones in Tampa Bay.
What's his name worked?
Yeah.
Hey, while we're on the Bengals, there are a couple of encouraging things real quick while we're here. Or actually, there's one. Folks already know about Auden Tate. That's great. We're still waiting on AJ Green. It honestly sounds like AJ Green doesn't want to play because he doesn't want to hurt his trade value, or either they don't want to. There's something going on. I don't know what your take is on that, Drake, but I feel like there's something going on with AJ Green. It's like, it's almost, why play the guy whenever your team's so bad? But
they should trade him.
They should trade him. Alex Erickson.
Mm-hmm.
So the slot receiver, he is working, and not just, from the slot, but 50%, 39%, 33%. They move all these guys around. He's really more of the Z because Tyler Boyd gets all of the slot work. But Erickson's the guy that they'll work inside and then they'll use him outside in the Z. But man, over the last 2 weeks straight in PPR, 10 and 22 fantasy points, and the utilization is there. The snaps, 80% and 94%. His routes ran per dropback, 86% and 98%. Get this, end zone targets, 1 in each of the last 2 weeks. So this guy's sneaky. This guy's getting, a lot of good looks. Again, it's on a team that's really bad, but it's on a team that's going to trail most weeks and is going to have to throw the ball quite a bit. So Erickson is a guy that, you can probably get for almost nothing on your waiver wire, but he's one of those guys that, with 22 points, somebody could go out and I guess bid quite a bit on him, but he's not fool's gold, if you will. Like once AJ Green comes back, all bets are off. But right now, he's a guy that's working in just as much as Auden Tate, and remember, this is the Rams offense. They like to spread it out across 3 guys. Now, Tyler Boyd is clearly the one right now. At this point, he had 30% of the targets this last week, but Erickson had 33%, this last week, and Boyd's at 24% on the season. So just a guy, if you're in a mid-sized, deeper league, you got bye weeks to deal with, that's a guy to think about.
Absolutely. Since we're talking about sick backfields right now, let me read a quote from our friend of the show, Evan Silva. Again, Hustle20, promo code over at establishtherun.com. Save some cash. Since Melvin Gordon returned, 27 of his 36 carries have gained 3 yards or fewer, 75%. With 2 fumbles, 11 of his 14 targets have gained 3 yards or fewer, 79%. All told, plays intended for Melvin Gordon are averaging 2.3 yards. 4 of which have gained first downs. They are 0-3 since he's returned. Tweet from Evan Silva. Wow. I mean,
it's an offensive line thing. I mean, really, when you look at it, I mean, Eckler has not been that great on the ground either. But Eckler just brings more, by the way of, the passing game. This was a game where the Chargers felt like they just had to keep throwing to try to, keep that game close. Obviously, the other way you can look at it, is Gordon, those 2 plays that they called fumbles were both touchdowns. So he could have scored a touchdown. If I'm an Austin Eckler owner, I'm still trying to sell him just because I don't see this stuff. I just don't see it. I don't see his value being able to hold. Quite often he's going to be the 4th or 5th option in the passing game, because they do have other talented players. I mean, talk about a guy that's just come out, after his injury and gone and played great as Hunter Henry. He had 21% of the targets again this last weekend. Keenan Allen, who we told people to trade for last week, got back on track with 29% of the targets this week. And then you have Mike Williams, who's healthy. So Eckler on any given week could be the 4th option in the passing game rather than, the 2nd or the 3rd. And he's plays second fiddle in the running game. So I'm still a believer in selling Eckler. If you can get something nice, you don't just give him away. I mean, he's still a flex play going forward. But he's just going to be tricky to figure out. He's had 24 points, then 6, then 26. Melvin Gordon's been 8, 8, and 11. But I feel much better about Melvin Gordon's utilization, whenever I look at, his rushing attempts, 75%, 57%, 76%. The problem is the offensive line is terrible, and the Chargers have been in some scripts where they just haven't been able to stick with the run as much as they want to. But Melvin Gordon's target shares haven't been bad, 13%, 7%, 8%. He's going to have another 10 to 15% week coming. But like I said, it's just a really bad offensive line situation, Drake. Same thing that we talked about for, Mixon. Same thing applies here, for Melvin Gordon.
And they just lost Forrest Lamp today. So the hits just keep on coming. As your guys, you're friends of the show. Let's all be frank here. Come on, get a little closer to the screen. All right. We're all friends here. We're trying to win cash off our buddies. All right. Little hit, get out of bad situations. We don't want to be involved in teams with bad offensive lines, bad coaches, dumpster fires. Sell those guys before your trade deadlines, okay? Let's get guys on good offenses, ascending play callers, smart head coaches. That's what's going to get you to the promised land. I say all that, and then I want to talk about the Tennessee Titans. So Ryan Tannehill took over from Marcus Mariota, and what struck me is his average yards per attempt, I believe, were 10.8. So really, he's pushing the ball down the field, and it showed in one Corey Davis. where the former first-round pick is putting it on people now. Oh, my God, look what happens when you can get the ball competently to Corey Davis, 6 for 80 and a touch against the Chargers. I went and scooped him up. He was for free in one of my leagues. Somebody just dropped him. Shout out to my buddy Gabe Butler out there. So,
thanks, Gabe.
Yeah, I'm starting him this week. So I'm a Corey Davis fan. If you have a competent quarterback that can throw him the ball, A.J. Brown, same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. So Tannehill looked more. What I saw from Tannehill was at least somebody that looked. I felt he at least looked confident. Right, Mariota just didn't seem any, and we've seen this for a while now with Mariota. Just didn't seem to feel comfortable in the offense, very unwilling, to push the ball down the field in many cases. And so it's not like Tannehill's a guy that typically lights things up, pushing the ball downfield, but he does seem to have some early rapport with Corey Davis as well as A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown saw 28% of the targets, Drake.
Yeah.
Yeah, crazy, huh? I mean,
that tree has really been trimmed now to Brown, Davis, and Humphreys.
Yeah, and you did have Delaney Walker leave the game early, and Jonnu Smith actually had a couple of nice plays in the game as well. So it's still here's what I'll say. I think it's an upgrade because you can't do worse than what we did with Mariota at quarterback. So I'm fine with any one of these guys as a pickup. I still wouldn't spend a ton, and here's why. The same things that we discussed all the way back in the preseason, which are it's a team that when they can will run the ball. For example, last week they only dropped back to pass 53% of the time. That is really, really, really low. You've still got multiple weapons. Yeah, it had, to your point, it's maybe been trimmed a little bit, because they've kind of limited Tajay Sharp now. He's only seeing a route on about 30% of the dropbacks now, whereas he was getting 50, A.J. Brown was getting 50, and then Corey Davis was getting 70. So to your point, it's more of a Corey Davis is the 1A. He's running routes on about 80% of the plays. A.J. Brown's anywhere from 60 to 70%, but doing really good things when he's on the field. It seems like the guy's making a play each week. So I'm hoping that, we see those things continue to improve. Adam Humphries, now with Humphries, what you have to understand is it's either matchup based or we need to be in a situation where the Titans are needing to continue to pass to win the game. And that's when they're going to run 11 personnel. Also, you had Delaney Walker out, so they ran more 11 than 12 this last weekend, which helped Humphries. So Humphries is the guy that's going to go up and down the most. But I'm with you. I think Corey Davis, he's still a shaky wide receiver 3, but at least we can have a little bit of confidence with him, and we can hope that Tannehill can just continue on this last performance and that they continue to build rapport. And that he throws in the ball with confidence.
They've got the Bucs this week. Let's hope we get him in. I bet he's going to be a heavy DFS play. And if you like playing DFS, check out my show Eat the Chalk. It's on Twitter at Eat the Chalk DFS. I tape that on Wednesday nights. Good show if you're into cash games. Look it up on iTunes. Eat the Chalk DFS podcast. How about Zach Pascal in Indianapolis, Dwayne? Here's a guy who basically nobody had heard of. They thought he was like a waiter or somebody. And he goes off for 6 for 106 and 2 on 7 targets. He's had a couple of good games in a row now. And he's kind of entrenched himself with Paris Campbell out of the lineup as the second option for Jacoby Brissett in Indianapolis. So I think he's going to be picked up on a bunch of wires tonight.
Yeah, I would be careful with him. Targets have only been at 7 and 16%. Routes per dropback, 45 and 44%. Snaps, 54 and 47%. So those are his last 2 games in each of those areas. Chester Rogers has really got the same marks, but just slightly higher. And then Deion Kane is also right there. So really what we have is we have T.Y. Hilton, and then these other 3 guys that are just rotating across the other 2 spots. They're running a lot of 11 personnel. Now they will run some 12. The guy that's a little more interesting for me right now in Indy, and I don't want to – it's not like jam a big stake in the ground, but there is a little bit of a trend here, and that's at tight end, and that's Jack Doyle. Jack Doyle has gone – his snaps have gone up from 73 to 77%, and his routes per dropback, Drake, 42% up to 73% this last week. Now, I was looking earlier. I didn't see anything. I don't know if Eric Ebron maybe missed a few plays due to injury or something in this game. So if anybody out there is watching this, on Periscope or on YouTube and you have an answer, feel free to, hit Drake up with that information. But on Eric Ebron, it was his lowest routes per dropback for the season, only 39%. So I thought that was kind of interesting You did see a slight spike for the third guy, Mo Ali Cox. But the guys in Indy, those are guys I wouldn't spend a lot of, if you're going to put any of those receivers in, just know it could easily be the other one the following week. And I don't know when we'll get Paris Campbell back. I would be the most excited about adding him just because of his big play ability.
Here's something I really wanted to ask you about. So you're Mr. Utilization Report, right? We read all your work at Establish the Run, promo code Hustle20. And I want to get your thoughts on D.D. Westbrook versus DJ Chark, because Westbrook now looks like he's getting a ton of snaps, a ton of targets. Let me look at my notes here. 25% or better target rate in 4 of the last 5 games.
Yep. Yeah, good call, Drake. Yeah, he has. And he's a guy, though, we've talked about him. The problem is his ADOT, his average depth of target, had been so low, and he's not the greatest run after the catch guy, or at least he hasn't been so far. He flashed that ability much more in college at Oklahoma. We just haven't seen it pan out as much at the NFL. And we need him to turn some of these smaller plays into big plays. But yeah, if you look at the routes ran per drop back, we've talked about Westbrook really being, one of the top 2 guys with Chark each week. And he's still continuing to do that. But yeah, his target's 23%, 28%, 25%. Chark over the last 3 weeks, 25, 24, and 13. Now, the way the 2 guys are being used, Chark's average depth of target is 14.6 and Westbrook's 7.7. So Westbrook is working underneath and working intermediate. And then Chark is the guy, stretching the field, and pushing things vertically down the field. He's also, he'll catch some intermediate stuff and do some run after the catch type work as well. But I think they're both fine, actually. Right now we're going to have to see. I think Foles is returning to some drills this week with 7-on-7. But really, as far as playing with Minshew, these guys have truly, gelled. And this last week, Chris Conley even got back in the mix a little bit. His targets have gone from 7 to 10 to 22%. And he's also a guy that's working down the field. Actually, he's truly their, Chark would probably be more their intermediate, 10 to 15 guy. Westbrook is their underneath guy. And then Conley is kind of the guy they use to stretch the field a lot. He has an average depth of target of 16.7.
Tight end, we kind of covered a little bit as we went throughout the show. Guys who might still be on the wire, Herndon, if he ever gets over whatever the hell's wrong with him. Jonnu Smith, Rudolph. Let me ask you, Dwain, about drops. I want to throw a couple of guys at you. You tell me. I know every league is different and all that, but in a generic sense, would you drop some of these guys? The first one being Damian Williams from the Kansas City Chiefs. Seeing a lot of guys out there talking about dropping him. He just hasn't produced much in the last month. We've got a backup quarterback for God knows how long. Would you keep him on your roster, or are you cutting him to the curb?
It does depend on the league, like you said. If you're in a deeper league, obviously not. Intermediate, medium-sized league, you're going to have to think about it. If you're in a shallow league and there's something you really want, you can. I'm personally not cutting him. The reason why is it is the Kansas City offense. I know we're going to be without Mahomes, for a few weeks. And again, this is coming from a guy, full disclosure, I don't play in any small leagues. So your league better than me. If you're in a small league, you can probably go ahead and dump him. But it's still a guy that, even though this thing is being split up 3 ways, it's an offense that I like. If Mahomes comes back on the short side of the injury, bug, great. Now, if it's something where you're just in a super tight spot, and you've got to do something in waivers, and you're like, well, which guy, what I'll do sometimes, Drake, in situations like that, I'm like, who's the guy I can release that's the least likely to be picked up? Yeah. And so I try to think through things like that. Now you don't always know, but Damian Williams is a guy I'm trying to still hold, Drake, if I can. Obviously I'm not excited about the situation. 33% of the rushing attempts this last week, 28% of the snaps. We've got a Tampa Bay situation going here, Drake.
That's the next question.
43% of the snaps to LaShawn McCoy, 28% to Damian Williams, and 30% to Darrell Williams this last week. And carries 44, 33, and 7. Routes per dropback, 32% to McCoy, 23% to Damian Williams, and then 32% to Darrell Williams. It's like, yeah. So I'm not saying he's undroppable, but if I can find a way to hold him, I will. But if there's something I really want, just go ahead.
We'll make this one easier. Tampa Bay running backs. Keep them, dump them.
Yeah, I've already moved on. to be honest. So these are guys that I already dumped, and it depends. Again, if I'm in a deeper league, obviously I wasn't able to dump them because there's nothing else for you to go pick up, unless it was just, now this week there could be. I'm gonna take a chance on Ty Johnson over Peyton Barber or Ogunbowale, for sure. I'm willing to carry Chase Edmonds the rest of the way over any one of these guys as well.
I mean, if you need a good 4 points out there, Peyton Barber is 4 points.
Absolutely.
All right, last guy I want to ask you about. How about Duke Johnson? 56 yards on 9 touches this week.
Yeah, I mean, it's another team that is all game script, But what we've seen with Duke Johnson is he's just not. It's not going to happen. Not unless Carlos Hyde goes down. He's not going to get the workload that we had kind of thought he might be able to get. Remember when all of this news went down, we thought, Duke Johnson might be able to at least get 50% of the carries. This last week he got 60%, but again, that's in a game where the Texans lost by 7. If you look at the 2 previous weeks where the Texans won by 21 and 7, he only had 41% and 35% of the snaps. His carries this last week, 30%, which was his highest in 3 weeks. Again, because it was in a situation where he was on the field more because this was a trailing situation. He ran a route. His routes per dropback were 68%, by far the highest in 3 weeks, which had been 42 and 43 the 2 weeks before. This is all about a game script situation. You can't trust it. So Duke Johnson, and you got a reminder on Carlos Hyde last weekend too. After him posting a 12 and a 20 point weeks in PPR formats, Carlos Hyde had been really running along well. 63% of snaps, 63%, then it dropped to 40. And then his rushing attempts dropped down to 52%. His routes per dropback dropped down to 28% because, again, the Texans were trailing. So it's a situation where these two guys, if you can figure out which game script's going to play out, then you might be able to use one of them in the flex. But if you can't, it's just going to be a maddening situation, Drake.
We're past the halfway point of the fantasy football season. Trade deadlines are coming up the next 2 to 3 weeks or so. I just looked mine up on Yahoo today. I think it's November 9th. It's usually a Saturday, so check your league settings on that. Folks, make sure you're scanning the bottom of that roster. You're finding guys who are useless. If you're never going to play a guy, he's got no value to you at all, go find one of these premier handcuffs that are out there on the waiver wire. Pick them up. Someone who, if there's an injury, get him on your roster. We're all about roster management here. If you've got Antonio Brown on your roster, get rid of him. If you had injured guys, get rid of them. You don't need Will Dissly on your bench anymore, folks. Trust me, this is stuff I see in all the leagues that I play in out there. So I just want to pass the public service announcement along. But he is Dwain McFarland. Follow him on Twitter at Dwain McFarland. DWAIN is how you spell Dwayne. I'm at Drake Fantasy. I had to think about it. I have a board
That's
right
okay.
in front of me. I literally,
I was waiting to see, is he going to misspell my name? I'm just going to let him go with it.
Yeah, over a year and a half now, I'm going to misspell. I'm on a board. My wife's a teacher in 5th grade, and one of her friends is a really good artist, and she made me this nice board with, it says Fantasy Football Hustle on it, and it's got all our Twitter handles and all that, and it just kind of sits in front of me just so you could stare at it, because that's happened before. You're doing a show, and you're like, what's my Twitter? And you're like searching around, like, I don't know, but... Yeah, he is at Dwain McFarland. I am at Drake Fantasy. The show is at FF Hustle. Thanks to everybody who checked us out on Periscope, on YouTube, on our Facebook page at Fantasy Football Hustle Podcast. We appreciate it. Final thoughts, Dwain. What do you got going on this week over at Establish the Run?
I'll be putting out the utilization summary, tomorrow, and that'll be it, over there for this week. And then I've got the podcast this week. That was a lot of ums. Sorry. I've got a podcast this week over at the RSP. We'll be doing the fantasy film and data. Myself and Jay Moyer will put that. Well, I think we're shooting for Friday this week. Normally we try to do it on Thursday, but it'll probably be Friday.
There you go. Again, go over to establishtherun.com. Promo code HUSTLE20, save you 20% off on a weekly, monthly, or season-long package. Thanks to those guys for giving us that opportunity to save you guys a few bucks.
Absolutely.
Hopefully you're taking advantage. And folks, the last thing I want to ask you to do, if you love the show, get on iTunes or wherever you find our show, rate us, like us, comment on us. We need it. It helps us climb up those ratings on iTunes so people can find this show and hear all of Dwain's fantastic comment. So for Brian, I got the flu, folks. I'm so out of it. My wife didn't even think I was going to do a show today. But for Dwain
you're
McFarland,
a trooper. Thank you for
I'm
pulling
Brian
through.
Drake. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week. Good luck in week 8, everybody.
See you, everybody.